Avatar the live action. Netflix messed up Avatar to the point where I am genuinely saddened, but unlike the M. Night Shyamalan disaster, the Netflix show has potential. With some changes, I believe that Netflix can course correct over the next 2 seasons and have something which comes out as a net positive, both financially and for fans watching. While the main problem with the show stems down to writing, and that is a fairly simple good or bad spectrum, there are a lot of decisions, changes, or things which would make the show at least have a better plot. The first decision, and the toughest one, is what to do with Aang's bending. Season 1 puts the writers in between a rock and a hard place where Aang never waterbends nor even firebends in Season 1. This means that we are desperately behind, and the main journey of the show, meaning the bending will now either need to waste all of Season 2 or take place during the gap between seasons that will exist to accompany the actors aging. I think it'll probably be best that in the first episode or two, it will take the return to Amashu, and there we will see Aang finishing his training with Katara in that time. The other problem is with Zuko and Azula. Again, what happened at the end of the season has repercussions going forward. The first time they meet, it won't be under the pretense that Azula is going to bring Zuko home after what Zhao said to him at the end of the season, plus that Zhao was working for Azula. I think that means that we will get Zuko and Azula as enemies from the start of the show, which would be something really interesting to see, as the two siblings fighting over the Avatar, which might give Aang an easier time, at least at first. I also think that the plots of the Deserter and Bato of the Water Tribe need to be moved to Season 2, especially as Daya's Black Sun approaches nearer and nearer, and we have cut so many of the warriors so far, I'll bet we'll cut even more soon on, like the Swamp Benders. But now that we have all these surface level things settled, I have an idea for what to do with the season. What to keep, what to reorder. So now that we have everything settled, it's time to begin. First episode of the new show would have to be the Avatar State. I'll just stick with the title of whichever episode I think is most important out of the combined ones, just for clarity's sake. This episode would be formed out of 3 others: the Avatar State, the Deserter, and the Northern Air Temple. 2 of the 3 episodes are from Season 1, but I think they all fit pretty well into the narrative. The main difference of these episodes is that it would be Zhang Zhang who lives in the Northern Air Temple, and he takes the place of the general in the Avatar State episode. This episode would serve a few purposes. 1. It would reinforce Aang's necessity to learn the elements while also making it more difficult for him as a character and his journey psychologically. It would need to be the first time we saw a really good Fire Nation person, someone who was truly kind, and it could pretty easily set up the driving motivation for the season. Following the logic of Season 1, there will almost definitely be a shrine of Yang Chen at the north where Aang can go and talk with her. There he will begin his journey to master the Avatar State at will to end the war. This episode would be about Zhang Zhang being a teacher to Aang and trying to teach him firebending to help him master the Avatar State. This time around, when he burns Katara like he does in that episode, although she can heal herself now that she knows how to do that, Aang feels bad, and when Sokka starts yelling at Aang, he would distance himself to the point of entering the Avatar State. Now, the only thing I don't know is what direction to take Zhang Zhang. I think it needs to be Aang's fault that he burns Katara and enters the Avatar State, but I want Zhang Zhang to be pushing Aang, but not in a necessarily antagonistic way, because again, he needs to be the first truly good Fire Nation citizen. Either way, the B plot of this episode would probably be Zuko and Azula meeting for the first time in the season and trying to work to capture the Avatar. But due to a mix of sibling rivalry and Azula's manipulation, it will set them up as enemies for the rest of the season. On to the next episode now, which would be Return to Omashu. This episode would of course contain Return to Omashu as well as Avatar Day and The Blind Bandit. I feel like this is going to be the most difficult episode out of the new show because the season set it up for failure, at least the first one, with everything it introduced and got rid of. It got rid of the Secret Tunnel episode in Season 2. It revealed that Azula had conquered Omashu way too early. So, as an audience, we already know that Team Avatar is going to a dead end. But to make the episode more important, we can combine it with a few others so it still works as a net positive. The episode could focus on how we meet Toph and how people are forced to survive without the Avatar. It could take that civilian hatred of the Avatar from Avatar Day, mixed with the underground fight club nature of the Blind Bandit, and suddenly we have a more interesting episode. It kind of makes sense that the people of Omashu would dislike Aang. From their eyes, he brought the Fire Nation to their door. Since the first firebender rhymed with him, being Iroh, at least from what they know, and he didn't help defend them, which led to Azula conquering the city. Now, I think there would need to be a decently big change right here. If the Fire Nation and Jet are in Omashu, there's no way that Jet is going to be leaving for Ba Sing Se if the Fire Nation is literally inside the city. So, Jet will probably interact with the characters in some way, shape, or form in this episode, a motivator which gets him to go to Ba Sing Se in the future. I'm not entirely sure how, but the episode will need to give him a reason to move on to Ba Sing Se. Also, I'm not sure what to do with Boomy this time around. It would feel anticlimactic if we have another episode dedicated to rescuing someone from the palace, as we did at episode 4 of season 1, and I think it might just be better to cut Boomy for this time being. Also, since the mechanic was a traitor to the Fire Nation, I would assume that they ran away during the invasion, though we could also explore them getting captured, as he's forced to build things like the drill or Azula's tank thingy, and Team Avatar could free him in the end, since I would love to see more of the Mechanist on his son, because I love Danny Pudi, and they did a good job. Finally, this episode will also need to cover the introduction of Toph Beifong. I definitely want to see more of the underground fighting arena, as I think it's really interesting, and if Omashu, to see how they cover how it stays hidden from the Fire Nation, because that means there would be benders in the city. So, interesting. And see more of the rich side of Omashu and how they interact with the war from Toph's family. All of this could create a very interesting episode, which I would love to see. Then the third one, I think it would have to be Bitter Work. The episode would be an adaptation of Bitter Work and The Chase, though leaning more towards The Chase. But the episode is called Bitter Work because it needs to have an emphasis on Aang's training as the Avatar. Since he still wouldn't have mastered water, I think this episode could be interesting by having him study with both Toph and Katara at the same time, which could accentuate the Katara versus Toph drama in The Chase, and with everyone on edge from insomnia, it could be a really fun team building episode. Plus, while we get to focus on the dysfunctional state of Team Avatar and Aang's struggle of learning, plus the guilt of previously burning Katara, we can parallel this by a real introduction to Mei and Ty Lee. In between scenes of Aang trying to train, we could also being constantly on the run, we can get a look inside of Azula's tank thingy and see how she runs her ship, metaphorically speaking. We can also later see how Mei and Ty Lee fight, their fighting styles, and get more of the relationship of these three characters, which really isn't explored until season 3 when they are out of the war. Plus, if we want, we can exude Zuko and Iroh meeting Toph instead of just Toph meeting Iroh. I think it could be interesting that if Toph doesn't mention who she's traveling with, to see her interact with the slightly more friendly Zuko, which would add someone else who he betrays in Crossroads of Destiny, and just that interconnection is something which I think is one of the strengths, biggest possible strengths, and it needs to use that more. The main purpose in this episode is to repair some of the damage done in Season 1. It lets Aang practice his bending. It lets Team Avatar actually be a team, and it would really add on to Aang and Katara's character, something we desperately need. The fourth episode would be The Library. This again is an episode that people are theorizing will be cut, especially with Wang Shi-tong being in Season 1. But the episode is really important and can also bring back an essential element from Season 1, which we never got in the first season. The episode would include the library and Bato of the Water Tribe. In concept, these episodes are so different, but I think they can come together in an interesting way. We know that Sokka's father isn't disappointed in him in the flashback which shall not be named, but Bato doesn't necessarily agree with that belief in the flashback that shall not be named. So, we can combine the episode where Sokka really takes his footing as a leader, the library, by creating one of his most brilliant plans to connect with Sokka's past trauma, Bato of the Water Tribe, and replace a useless character in the professor with someone who will soon play a bigger role, Bato. I think this could work. How I see it working is Bato could join up with Team Avatar, both being looking for the lost library. For Bato and later Sokka, it would be about defeating the Fire Nation. For Katara, maybe finding more waterbending scrolls or starting to research the people who killed her mother. For Aang, it would be looking for inspiration about the Avatar state, as that will be his driving motivation throughout the season. If Spirited Away can be a full episode, I definitely think this could do the same. The episode would have most of the characters separated in the library, each looking for their own pieces of information. I really like the part of the original episode where Wang Shitong would only let Team Avatar into the library if they were going to use the information for good. Implementing that change and possibly having multiple characters looking for harmful information, and Aang being the only one to help people could be really interesting, especially where the next episode would heavily contrast this. I just know that I'd be furious if in Season 2, Team Avatar learns about Day of Black Sun by one of the previous avatars again and robs that moment from Sokka because it's essential to his character. Plus, this episode could hopefully resolve the god-awful Sokka flashback in Season 1 by introducing us to Bato and hopefully set up the possibility of Sokka reuniting with his father in whichever episode has the Guru. Now, the one difficulty with this episode is how do we use Toph, since she doesn't enter the library. I could see that she either runs into her parents' mercenaries or she has a larger interaction with the Sandbenders to help set up Aang's anger in the next episode. I haven't mentioned Zuko or Azula much so far, but I think for the most part they would just be plotting against each other, and I think in this episode it would be where Zuko leaves Iroh. Maybe this time, with Azula targeting Zuko, he would say it's to protect Iroh, but this episode, feeling a bit empty, that goodbye and the moments leading up to it could be in this episode to really fill it out. Next up is the episode I think has the highest potential of happening more or less how I say it, and it could be extremely cool at the same time. The episode would be The Desert, and it would draw from that episode as well as Zuko alone, and maybe just a tiny fraction of Appa's Lost Days, at least the parts with the Sandbenders at the beginning of that episode. Combining Zuko alone in the desert would be such a smart choice. Both episodes are about characters on a harsh journey and deal with intense psychological turmoil. Bato would still be around in Netflix Our Cowards. We would probably lose the cactus juice scene, but besides that, the episode would stay pretty identical. We would get even more bitterness among Team Avatar, and ideally, Katara would help guide them through the episode. And for Zuko, I think they would really need to lean hard on the fish out of water aspect, as well as how lost Zuko is, not knowing who he wants to be or where he wants to go. One scene I think is essential to keep is Aang killing the bugs. He is someone who does not kill, so to see him go psycho on these characters would just be crazy. Even if they are just bugs, it would show how lost he is mentally, and it could also have some fun paralleling Zuko and Aang. While Zuko will try to be kind, it will fail in the end, and Aang will be angry and bitter, only to be saved by his friends, since that's what friends for, and that's kind of the point of Avatar. And of course, Aang almost killing the Sandbenders would be nice, since again, how when he thinks he loses someone he loves, he enters the Avatar state, Katara in the Zhongshan episode, and now Appa. It would be important to show if you really want to focus on the Avatar state side of Season 2, which I think is the best way to do it. Finally, in this episode, it would really be cool to see Iroh following Zuko and maybe meeting Azula, having them talk. It could be interesting as long as it doesn't just do the info dump dialogue in the first season. I think it would need to be pretty subtle and just have them talking and not go too over the top with that. Or if not, just cut this idea. Next episode is the City of Walls and Secrets. This would be the introduction to Ba Sing Se, like how the North acts in season 1 of the show, although we won't see too much of the city until the next episode. That's because this episode will focus more on the journey to Ba Sing Se and not spend so much time inside. The episodes which will be covered are The Serpent's Pass, The Drill, and The City of Walls and Secrets. Well, I don't want this episode to be just about Ba Sing Se. I think before we see the really nasty underbelly in the next episode with the Dai Li and Jet and all of that, we should see the beautiful surface on this episode and after spending a season to get here. This episode would have to do a lot. Team Avatar needs to say goodbye to Bato, meet Suki, fight Azula, enter Ba Sing Se, while also needing to reunite Iroh and Zuko for them to enter Ba Sing Se as well. But I think these episodes can work together. They would still have a depressed Aang who at some point needs to get over himself and get back to being the Avatar, doing the selfless thing, helping people. I think we can probably cut the pregnant woman from the Serpent's Pass, as I think that will just waste time. But I think we do need an innocent character or characters to fill this role. To reach back to season 1, I think it would be really cool if we included someone like Meng and maybe Aunt Wu as well. We don't need to we also really need to introduce the romance aspect of the show. And while season 1, it didn't make sense that Aang was asking Sokka about romance, like what would have happened in the fortune teller episode. Now it would make perfect sense, especially since he would be with Suki in this episode, and he's already been with Yue. And then the second part of this episode would focus on the drill. We don't need anything too long, but the drill shows how dedicated Azula is, how far she will go to make her father proud, literally boring through the wall of the world's greatest city to conquer it. I also think it could also serve a good moment for Zuko if they want to do it. While he'd still be doing his shtick with Jet on the boat, I think it would be cool for Zuko to see the drill, know that Aang's on there by seeing the water bending and the air bending, but to stay out of it, to stick with his uncle, and to help the people on the boat by giving them food. Finally, we would end the episode on the tram ride into the city, seeing the beauty inside the walls of Ba Sing Se, and how peaceful everything looks, how tranquil, how safe. And I can just imagine the episode ending as they exit the tram and meet Judy. This would lead straight into Lake Laogai. This episode would take from the episode, as well as Tales of Ba Sing Se, and a bit more of Appa's Lost Days. This will probably be the most important episode of the show, doing so many things at once, introducing so many plot points, and setting the board for the finale. It will really show us the dark nature of Ba Sing Se, give us many character moments for Zuko, Aang, and Iroh, though I think it will have important moments for everyone in Team Avatar and even some side characters. The A plot will be Team Avatar trying to get a meeting with the Earth King, only to try and fail time after time. Since Aang and Sokka don't have any experience with Jet, they will need to reach Lake Laogai a different way. What I think will best, it will take a bit of setup to get to, so let's switch over to Zuko and Iroh and what they're doing, which will of course be running their tea shop. There will be a duel with the Jet, but later on, Zuko will go on his date liking Tales of Ba Sing Se, because I think that's a really important scene for him. It shows him the chance of a normal life, but there will be a big change. He will once again run into Jet, but this time it's when Jet is brainwashed. Jet would be mentioning something about his trip to Lake Laogai by the Earth King, and he would mention somehow that he saw Appa, something, I don't know, a big furry creature, but something that Zuko knows he's talking about Appa. Now, Zuko would go break off on his date in search of the Avatar Sky Bison, kind of like what happened in the episode. Zuko will do something to get captured so he can go to Lake Laogai. So now, how Team Avatar would be alerted to the presence of Lake Laogai is Iroh would seek them out. While Iroh is worried of what happened to Zuko, I think we need to connect this scene with Iroh's tale and the tales of Ba Sing Se. So we will need to have Iroh mourn his son at some point and have that connected to his fear of losing Zuko. And if there's time at the start of the episode, it would be nice to get scenes of Iroh helping people in Ba Sing Se. He leaned to be a bit too evil in season 1, so just a few scenes like this, plus a few other things dispersed around the season, it could make Iroh work a lot better here. There would be a few different reasons motivating Team Avatar to go rescue Zuko. Most importantly would be learning that Appa's there. For Katara, maybe it's Jet, but what gets everyone to trust Iroh is that Toph met Zuko and Iroh earlier this season, so she can vouch for both characters. Then, we would get everyone going to Lake Laogai. With Iroh being with everyone, we would have the same dynamics of what happens in Crossroads of Destiny, where Iroh can act as an advisor to everyone and still have everyone wary of Zuko's true intentions. Finally, the episode would end with all the enemies needing to rely upon each other to break out of Lake Laogai, ending with everyone kind of just awkwardly going their own ways. Everyone knows they're in the city, setting us up perfectly for the finale. And the final thing to add on to this episode is the ending of Appa's Last Days, where the Kyoshi warriors are kidnapped by Azula and friends. At the start of the episode, we would see the warriors finding Appa and having him startled, flying away to be captured by the Dai Li. Cut, normal scene. Rest of the show. But the episode would end after Appa leaves, and then Kyoshi warriors are ambushed by Azula as the last scene. It would end with some explosive music blaring as we see Azula, May, and Ty Lee donning the iconic makeup. I love this episode so much as it's a pretty major reshuffling of the original show, but we still get a lot of that original charm poking through. I love Ba Sing Se for its dark feeling, and I think this show could really nail it. Plus, this episode sets up all the pieces onto the board for the finale. But before we cover that, I have a favor I'd like to ask from all of you. I am inching closer and closer to YouTube's ad monetization. So if you have enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please hit the subscribe button. It will let me know you want more videos discussing Avatar The Last Airbender and the live action as well. Plus, I do have one more big video about this show in the works, so just to help keep me innovating with all this lighting stuff and camera angles and trying new stuff out, subscribe, and thanks to everyone who's already has. Finally, Episode 8, The Crossroads of Destiny. This would be a packed episode, mixing 3 at the same time while also being the finale, so that itself carries a lot of weight. Quickly, at the beginning, we would get the Earth King, though it would probably be under 5 minutes. From there, the Guru and the Crossroads of Destiny would just be woven together. This is because the changes in Lake Laogai, having Aang needing to rescue Katara and Zuko, would feel repetitive since he just went to rescue people. How I see this episode playing out is that Aang, Toph, and Sokka would go on their side quests as usual, but Katara's role would change a little bit. Now that Toph can vouch for Zuko, Katara wants to get to know him a bit more to see if he could be an ally or if he really is all evil. As well as just keep an eye on him in case, and she would already be hanging out at Ba Sing Se. Why not? Make everyone have a chance to know Zuko a bit more personally, so the betrayal later in this episode will sting all the bit harder. Aang, Toph, and Katara would have a moment with him, so that the betrayal would sting all the more, especially for Katara, as she was putting herself out there to meet Zuko, not just a chance encounter. Katara and Zuko would just have a more fleshed out version of their talk, which already would happen in the cave of the episode, but this bonding time would be interrupted by news of the Kyoshi warriors arriving in the city. Katara goes to meet them while Azula sneaks over to meet Zuko. Katara gets kidnapped and taken to the Crystal Cave. At the same time, we should probably get a small scene of Sokka reuniting with Tad and Toph getting kidnapped and learning middle bending. But since we also have Aang and the Guru, that's something we need to cover. This is something which will be pretty hard since we don't really have the development of Aang's crush on Katara, besides the small part that I have added in the Serpent's Path. With so many moments reviewed, it might feel odd that Aang is going to give up his destiny just for the chance of dating her when we never really had that set up. But I do think it has to be Katara and love, because no other earthly attachment of Aang, whether it's his friends, Appa or Momo, could be such a sacrifice of love where he couldn't make it, so I think it has to be kept. And from here, things would happen as usual. Aang gets a vision and rushes back. He meets Iroh. He goes down into the caves, and I think Iroh's talk of, who do you want to be? should be moved here since the changes again in the Lake Loud Guy episode. It wouldn't make as much sense there since they're going to rescue him and it's not being accompanied. And of course, we would get Zuko's betrayal. And this time around, while Aang would still get revived by Katara, I think we need to add in two final scenes. One, Iroh being chained up, taken as a prisoner, and Azula, Ty Lee, May, and Zuko leaving Ba Sing Se as the Fire Nation flag falls over the Great Wall of Ba Sing Se. While season 1 ends in a similar way, I think it's much more important to have these scenes here in this episode. It's the end of the episode. It's supposed to be the darkest moment in the 100-Year War, at the very least since the Air Nation genocide was started in, and especially Iroh leaving Ba Sing Se once more, but finally where the city is finally captured, but this time he was defending the city. It would just be perfect. Avatar the Live Action Season 1 has many flaws, and the second season is set up for failure, but there's still time to course correct, and the show's quality still can rise and become closer to the greatness of the original show. With a structure like mine, I think Season 2 of Avatar, the live action, can hopefully be on par with Season 2 of the original, if not surpass it in places. My pitch is far from perfect. It would just be the rough draft of the story, but something like this, which can reshuffle and balance the mistakes of Season 1, while still moving the plot forward, is something essential they have to do. And as long as it's better than Season 1, I'll be a very happy guy. I don't hate the first season, though, but I have so many small individual issues which have piled up to the point of being a laundry list of issues which have been driving me insane. To see all of that, as well as the small nuggets of gold inside the show, make sure to check out this video on screen. See you there.